Back to another episode of Fight Outnumbered and Win. I'm joined here with Lieutenant Anderson, who runs a great series called Interview with a Ranger. So if you get an opportunity and want to watch it, I'm sure we just did an episode where, All right, so we had a good interview with a Ranger.
Yeah, it was a good one, sir.
Hey, I'm going to go a little bit off of my intended path because I had one of my officers asked a question. That was a really good question. I just thought, I'll just answer it. So he asked me on the text message, well, sir, watching all this maneuver warfare, I really understand, I understand, kind of the indirect approach. I understand getting behind the enemy, but he asked me, well, then how do you get there? How do you get behind the enemy? How do you get the enemy to come to me? And if you understand striker fighting, one of the things we're always trying to do is get the enemy to turn out of their prepared defenses and come at you. So how do you do it? So I thought we'd just answer that question right now and take it on. So if some of you are wondering that. So how do you get the enemy to come to you? You have to understand why that matters. So defense is the strongest form of warfare. You think about it, when you're in a stationary position, when you have fortifications, when you have sectors of fire set up, when you've identified all the likely avenue of approaches and you've got obstacles, you're in a pretty hard position to beat. And there's example after example of the defender being able to just repel attack after attack to great costliness of the attackers. Well, but then you figure out, all right, well then, if it's so hard to get somebody, to win as you're attacking, it costs so many soldiers, and in order to do that, how can you make an offense, take the strength of the defense and put it into the offense? Well, the solution is what you'll call a turning movement. So if you look in our doctrine, you're going to see a turning movement as a form of maneuver. They'll have the envelopments and the frontal attacks and the turning movements. Now, this is where I'm going to, disagree with Army doctrine. In Army doctrine, they'll talk about a lot of these forms of maneuver are echelon specific. What I mean is they'll say, well, only a division can do an envelopment. Only a corps can do a turning movement. And I say that's baloney. And I'll give you an example. So this is really simplest of how a turning movement would work. Okay, so imagine if you look around, you'd see we're in an office right now and there's doors. Imagine for a moment, we got a message in 1 hour, some maniacal killer is coming to shoot us up in this building. So we had 1 hour. Well, what would we do in that hour?
Just build barricades, try and canalize them to a certain avenue of approach, put up defensive barriers.
We do a lot. We'd have the Home Alone traps everywhere, paint cans coming at people, blow torches for their heads. We just watched that the other night with my kids. So we do all kinds of things, right? This place would be pretty hard because we know where they're going to come and all that. So we barricade really set. Now, so we're in a really good defensive position, and that person coming to us would have quite a big task. But then we get a phone call in the middle of it that says, hey, Broyles, I'm not coming to attack you there. I'm at your house. I'm attacking your wife and kids. Now, this position I'm in is now irrelevant. And I'm actually going to have to, that would turn me out to leave this position and actually move and actually go back toward my house to rescue my kids. Now, if he was there, he could easily get into a defensive position knowing I'm coming to him.
Now,
does that make sense?
The script's been flipped. Now they're on defense and you're having to pursue them.
That's exactly, that's what a turning movement is. It is basically getting to bypassing the enemy's defenses and getting to a point or a place that's dear to them and turning them out and forcing the enemy to attack into you. So I'm going to give you a good example here. So this is basic Operation Barbarossa. This is 1941 when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union. The blue is going to represent the Germans. The red is going to represent the Russians. So the Germans actually called this a kiel and kessel, or a wedge and cauldron. So there's the wedge, and they'd make it like an encirclement. But it's basically turning movement. So what's happening here is you have let's say the Soviets in a defensive position, typical 2 up, 1 back, like everybody does. All right, and they have their defensive position. What the Germans would do is the first thing, they would launch a frontal attack to pin them, to keep them in place. Then they would launch their tanks on both sides of them. They would penetrate and drive into depth well past their defensive positions. And the infantry would follow behind them, trying to march. And if you've ever seen the old Operation Barbarossa footage, you'll see a lot of infantrymen walking and walking and walking. They were covering 30 miles a day minimum just to try to keep up with the tanks. So the tanks would move up and they would actually get behind, and the infantry would be trying to catch up, and simultaneously this force here would be continue to pin the Soviets in place.
And this force is primarily infantry, or is it a...
Both.
Okay.
But mostly infantry, just to keep them pinned.
Gotcha.
Right. Then what would happen is after the tanks had gotten behind them, the tanks would turn out using their long-range cannons to prevent the outside forces reinforcing breaking the pocket. And the infantry would catch up, and they would turn in and set up a defense, get mines, start digging trenches, put out mines and everything, and create a defense. So now, in one moment, the Russians are on the defense, and the Germans are on the offense. With this encirclement, then we get here, and the Germans would be into the defense,
Right.
and turn out the Soviets, and the Soviets would have to turn out and attack into the Germans.
Right.
And this is where the Germans were great with their machine guns, the MG-42s. They were great with their anti-tank weapons, and they would be stationary, and they would just annihilate the Russian attackers. This is a turning movement.
Okay. So it is, I mean, yeah, and you talked about it not necessarily having to be echelon specific, because it sounds a lot like we did what were like remain over day missions in Afghanistan, where essentially we would seize a compound in a period of darkness and entice the enemy in that area to come at us in our defensive position, and then we would move before the next period of daylight, so that they would be constantly having to come after us in these different strategic key terrain across like a valley or something.
Yeah, it's a great example. So in the scenario what you were doing in Afghanistan, did you create where the enemy had to come at you?
Yes. Yeah.
And you were stationary
Absolutely.
and take shot.
Yeah, we're barricading people's houses with sandbags and stuff and drawing them into a fight with us.
Yeah, exactly. So to answer the first part of the answer to the question is, how do you get the enemy to come at me? Is what you're talking about is a turning movement. Now it's not a new idea. In fact, what I'm saying is, if you want to learn a new idea, read an old book. Armies from the beginning they've realized this, and they've been trying to do it. If you read about what Frederick the Great was doing during the 7 Years' War, he's always outnumbered. So what he's always trying to do is he'll do these oblong attacks, and he's always trying to get behind the enemy and cause them to attack him.
Right.
So he's trying to, Napoleon, that was his whole maneuver, I won't say it in French, his maneuver around them. That's what he's trying to do. He would get behind, Napoleon do the same thing. He would fix, then he would come around and get to their line of communication, and he would set up a defense and force their enemy to attack into him. And so this is not a new idea.
Right.
In World War I, World War II, everyone's trying to do it. The hard part is, though, how do you get there? How do you get behind somebody, or how do you get to a position where you're attacking something dear to your enemy to cause them to turn out of their defenses and come at you, right? So in that, like my example I brought up, my attacker here going and attacking my wife and kids, right? That's something dear to me. That would cause me to leave
Right.
and try to attack into him. Typically, what is, as an infantryman, when you're in a defensive position, what would cause you to go, oh crap, I can't remain here any longer?
Well, that'd be any sort of connection to supply lines and things that'll help us reinforce that position. If you attack our log packs or even a staging point behind us where we maintain fuel for strikers or ammunition or any communication lines back to the next echelon up, like all of those things would cause me to not feel comfortable where I'm at. Yeah,
exactly. And really good point, what people screw up here is they don't put enough, everyone focuses on, because this is a big maneuver blue arrow, everyone likes to focus here. This is where people really have to focus, and this is where people first don't do very well. They don't fix very well. What I mean is, so imagine if you're the enemy, what will create panic? Have you ever seen the movie Aliens, the director's cut? The part where they have the automatic machine guns.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And the aliens are coming at them, and what's the Hicks?
Yeah.
Hicks is running. He's like, and they start running, and the guns are going, brrr, brrr, and they're watching the ammo count, brrr, and they're starting, and they're like, oh, they're still coming, right? They are round counts depleting, and they're starting to get nervous because they realize the round count's going down. If this is happening, if this gunfight is going forward and the enemy's fighting, remember, their round count's going down.
Right.
So this entire time, that's why this pinning force is so important, because you're inducing them to expend ammunition, expend resources. They're losing lives.
Well, it also would seem like you would have to bait them in a way that's not going to completely, like, you're not throwing that force to the wolves to just get devoured. You're trying to bait them into expending resources.
Well, I have my book over there. I hold it up, Race to the Swift. You just quoted right over there, the blue one. I don't know if you just knew that, but you just quoted Race to the Swift, Richard Simpkins' entire premise. So well done.
Wow.
What he's going to say, Richard Simpkins is going to say, is these two forces, when you employ them, they will draw toward each other. If I'm pushing on you, you'll push back. So that actually slingshots your maneuver force. If we're not pushing forward, they'll start pushing back.
Gotcha.
And so not only these two forces will collide, if if I'm pushing on you, you'll tend to push back on me. And then like at Cannae, they even, Hannibal, what he even did, knew that he would actually start withdrawing a little bit, and he drew them forward. That's what Hannibal did that was so remarkable.
Right.
Is he actually started withdrawing and drew them forward, which then helped propel the cavalry behind.
And it could also possibly create openings.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
But remember, like we're talking about, what's going to create that, that sense that you're in big trouble, that you have to leave, is not only your round counts going down, your buddies are getting killed, you're becoming exhausted, and then you realize the enemy's behind you. And you realize no help is coming. Right. And you're alone, you're separated, and you're just on this piece of hill that doesn't matter. That's a turning movement. And that would force you would say, I've got to get out. You'd turn out if you realize you're blocked. And the Japanese did that really good. If you read the book, Defeat and a Victory by Slim, the Japanese would do that all the time to the British. The British would have a road. The Japanese would come around and set a roadblock. And the British knew that was their only road out. And they would panic, and they would start trying to break that roadblock. And the Japanese would come around and set a roadblock. Right. And they knew they're being trapped. So that's this portion of it. Just to answer your question, how do you get the enemy to come to me? What you're talking about is a turning movement. You create a fix, and then you have to get around them and get to a position that's dear to them, seize a position dear to them, usually their route of escape, their critical vulnerability, their log packs, something, and that will force the enemy to turn out and then come at you. So then once you get in that position, you set into a defense and force the enemy to come at you. All right? Hope that makes sense. Anything you want to add?
No, sir.
All right. And then we're going to talk about next video, well, how do you get there? All right, fight outnumbered and win.